three-dimensional or two-dimensional vectors that are not parallel. Let's say that we have a group of people playing tug of war. Let's say that one group let's see if my pen works now. Yeah. Let's say one group is pulling this direction at 10 newtons. All right. We'll just say there that everything has 2 or 3 significant figures. All right. And let's say that, and I'm going to make this easy. Let's say it's 30 degrees. And let's say another group is pulling out this direction, also 10 newtons. And let's say that is 120 degrees. And then let's say another group also pulls with 10 newtons. And let's say that is about, let's say that's 240 degrees. So what do I do to add these three together? In other words, what's the net force? Force is a vector. What's the net force? Well, to do any of this, I'm going to have to divide these into x and y's. So I'm going to divide them into an x. There's an x. There's an x. And there's an x. Notice that I have one, and these are not drawn to scale, by the way, so we got to do the math. I mean, this one looks longer than these two, but it may not be. So this one is positive, and these two point negative, right? All right, now, and we also need to divide them into a y. So there's a y, there's a y, and there's a y. So how do we do that? Well, x values are always equal to the hypotenuse times, that's supposed to say hypotenuse, times cosine of the angle, whatever the angle is, all right? So basically, we're going to take 10 newtons and multiply it by cosine of 30, and that will give us this first one. Then we'll multiply 10 newtons times cosine of 120. Cosine of 120. And then we're going to take 10 newtons and multiply it by cosine of 240 degrees. And that's going to be all of our x's. That's going to be all of our x values. All right? And if I do that, I'm going to get my calculator here. Let's see, 10 cosine of 30 gives me 8.7. We'll just say two significant figures. 8.7. And then I say 10 cosine of 120, and I get negative 5. These are all newtons, by the way. I'm kind of out of room here. And then I do 10 cosine of 240, and miraculously, told you I was going to make this easy, I get 5 newtons. So, in other words, I got 8.7 newtons pointing to the right, 5 newtons pointing to the left, and 5 newtons pointing to the left. And these are all parallel. And if I just sum those up, it's going to be 8.7 minus 5, which is negative 1.3 newtons. So my net x force is going to be equal to negative 1.3 newtons. So it's going to be pointing to the left. Okay, to find the y, I take the hypotenuse times sine of the angle. Well, in this case, that's going to be 10 newtons sine of 30 degrees, 10 newtons sine of 120 degrees, and 10 newtons sine of 240 degrees. And I'm going to take my calculator and multiply each of those out, and I'm going to get a positive 5 here. And look, the red is positive. I got 2 positive and 1 negative here. 10 sine of 120 degrees gives me a positive 8.7 newtons. And then when I multiply this one, I get a negative 8.7 newtons. If I add those together, or excuse me, sum them up, I'm going to get a positive 5 newtons. And that is going to be my net Y force. Okay? So basically what I have here is I have 5 newtons pointing up, correct? I guess legally. Let me erase this real quick. I'm going to make this red. So I'm going to make this red. So I got 5 newtons pointing up. That's my net Y force, right? 5 newtons pointing up. And then I have 1.3 newtons pointing to the left. That means I'm in the second quadrant, because if I make the hypotenuse of this new triangle, that's pointing in the second quadrant. So how am I going to get the answer to the green? I need 2 parts. I need an angle from the positive x-axis, and I need the hypotenuse. So I'm going to say 1.3 squared plus 5 squared, take the square root of that, in the words of Pythagorean theorem, and I get 5.2. So my net force, the magnitude of my net force is going to be 5.2 newtons. That's the magnitude. Now my angle is going to be my direction. And if you'll always do inverse tan of y over x, then I'm going to do inverse tan of 5 divided by 1.3. That gives me 75. I'm going to subtract 180 from that. And that gives me 104. So I have 104 degrees for my answer. And that's how you add those together. It doesn't get any harder than that. You find all your x values using cosine, find all your y values using sine, make a new triangle with your net x and your net y, and then Pythagorean theorem along with your tangent function. And let me know if you need more help.